Up next on Davidson Company, we take a road to yesterday. Welcome to another edition of Davidson and Company. You're going to love this guy. My guest, Howard Kroplick, is the author of The Long Island Motor Parkway, part of the Images of America book series. And Howard, welcome back.
Thank you, Larry.
And I enjoyed our conversation. Real quick, you and I grew up in the same area. We were talking about the famous ice cream store.
Jan's.
Jan's. So
right.
The older people out there remember Jan's and the kitchen sink.
The kitchen sink.
What
and
great
11-pound roller rink.
All that. Talk about great memories. How much fun was this book to put together?
It was a lot of fun because this is one of the most historic roads that was ever built in the United States. Not only Long Island, but the United States. And for many years, it was neglected. You couldn't really find a lot of information about it. So it was great doing the research on it, going to the Vanderbilt Museum, looking at the personal archives of William K. Vanderbilt Jr. in researching this, and going all over the country to come in some amazing images.
I'm going to give you three names. I'm curious if you think they're visionaries or not. I'm going to give you William K. Vanderbilt, Henry Ford, and Robert Moses. Put them in the same bag or separate them? I leave that to you.
Well, they're all visionaries in their own way. Willie K., who was the father of the Vanderbilt Cup Races, and he also was the father of the Long Island Motor Parkway, he was part of the Vanderbilt family. He was the heir to the fortune. He was the great-grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt. And he could have done anything in his life, but what he really wanted to do was follow his passion, and his passion was automobiles and driving fast. And he was a race car driver, and he brought racing to the United States through the Vanderbilt Cup Races. And then he really made the first major improvement in roads by building and financing the Long Island Motor Parkway. Henry Ford, amazing. Henry Ford was a director of the Long Island Motor Parkway. So he saw the initial growth of the Motor Parkway, he saw the Vanderbilt Cup Races, and he saw the interest in automobiles at an early age. And really back then, the cars were mainly for the wealthy, they were chauffeur-driven, and he saw hundreds of thousands of people attending the Vanderbilt Cup Races. And I think it helped inspire him to really develop a car that could be used by the masses. And Robert Moses, again, he put his imprint on Long Island, as you know, and he also was involved with the Motor Parkway. At some point, he was being encouraged to take over the Motor Parkway, and he realized, no, the Motor Parkway was a little too curvy, a little too small, and that's where he built Northern and Southern State Parkways.
Now, how the actual execution of the Motor Parkway changed the landscape of Long Island? I'm thinking just in terms of social terms, but also economic terms. When you put a road in, it's not a road to nowhere. So how did it actually change the tenor and tone of Long Island?
Well, when the Motor Parkway was first proposed in 1906, the population in, say, Nassau County was about 55,000. Suffolk County was about 30,000. I think by the end, when the Motor Parkway was finished in 1910 and then it extended out to 1930, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. So it really gave an opportunity for people to drive the length of Long Island to get to the different villages of both Nassau and Suffolk County.
One way America changed was not before the roads was the execution of the railroad. And also hand in with that was the immigrant experience. In many cases, the Chinese came over and built the railroads.
Right.
What role did immigrant experience in terms of building the Motor Parkway?
Well, the major part of the road was built by Italian immigrants. They worked, thousands of immigrants came over and they built it fairly quick. They wanted to get it ready for the 1908 Vanderbilt Cup race, and they only broke ground in June of 1908. The race was going to be held in October. So they were able to finish 9 miles of this road with about 16 bridges built to go over major intersections.
So you mentioned 16 bridges, intersections. Were there any new innovations in terms of actually constructing Long Island Motor Parkway? It's not just laying down a horse path for horse and buggies.
Right.
What came into play in terms of new ideas in putting this road together?
Yeah, the Motor Parkway really was a pioneer in many aspects. It was the first road built specifically for automobiles. All the other roads were built for trucks. They were built for horses and people bringing their goods into New York City, usually by horse carriages. So this was the first road built for automobiles. It was the first concrete road, too. It had, on the curves, they were banked curves to help the cars. There was guardrails. You had the bridges. It was the first road that had bridges going over intersections and also railroads. It even had landscaping. So it was really a true parkway.
Talk about the Cup races. So where actually did the road start? Take us from point A all the way to the end, we're going to call it this point B. It started where did it go, and where did it end up?
Well, the Motor Parkway, they only used a limited part for the Vanderbilt Cup races. In 1908, it really started from Merrick Avenue in East Meadow and went all the way through what's now Levittown, then it was the Hempstead Plains, went through Bethpage and ended at Round Swamp Road. And there they connected the course through public roads again. So typically they used Jericho Turnpike as a major part of it. That was in 1908. In 1909 and 1910, they even used a smaller part of the Motor Parkway, only about 5 miles, again, starting in Merrick Avenue in East Meadow and going through about Bethpage where Massapequa Hicksville Road it ended, and then went up Broadway, then went down Old Country Road, and they did about 22 laps in 1909 and 1910.
It's a toll road.
It's a toll road.
So I remember, we were talking about going back, remembering things in our past, and when you had to drive on Southern State, you had to go through the toll booths.
Yes.
People don't remember there were toll booths there.
Yes.
So this was
It was a quarter, I believe.
It was something like that.
Right.
In fact, I remember one of my friends worked and he had great stories because he used to pass out gum and candy to people as they were coming through, and they always used to laugh because you didn't expect that.
Right.
So great stories about working there and I guess breathing in all the stuff from the exhaust too, was not so good. Why was it a toll road?
Well, remember, this was privately financed. So Vanderbilt and its business associates, they spent about $2 million, which is the equivalent of about $100 million today, to build this road. It was totally privately financed. They had to buy the land, they had to build the road, they had to build the bridges. So they needed to get some income in. So that's why it was a toll road. And back then, initially, they were charging $2 a car, which again, in today's maybe about $20 a car to go through the toll. They found that they weren't getting the traffic, so they constantly were reducing it. The last toll charge that they had when the road finally closed in 1938 was about 40 cents.
Besides the road itself and the bridges, were there structures there besides just the toll booths? Were there homes attached to where people would stay that worked in the toll booths?
Yes, many of the toll lodges were also homes for the toll gatekeeper and their families too. Even though they were pretty small, this is where they lived, and there's a good example of that in Garden City. Garden City Toll Lodge was really left abandoned for many years, and then in the 80s, it was preserved by Garden City. Is now part of their Garden City Chamber of Commerce, right in the middle of town. So you really get a feel for what a toll lodge looked like and the size of it. And the toll keeper in Garden City, that's where his family lived.
Now the book refers to it as the New Appian Way.
Yes.
Tell us about the Old Appian Way and what does that mean?
Well, the Old Appian Way was in Italy. It was one of the first roads constructed in Italy, and this was going to be the road that really, on Long Island, brought commerce to Long Island and really helped change it from a rural area to a very successful, sprawling suburbia. Now, there's some people who question whether that was a good thing or not, because look years ago. It looked very attractive back then, without a lot of traffic, a lot of building going on.
Now, you used to talk about when we were growing up, you used to get to your parents' car and you would take a Sunday ride. We used to go into Huntington for a Sunday ride. Was this road also used what I call, quote unquote, the Sunday ride?
Oh, definitely. And that's how they promoted it. They said you can go out and see the lovely Long Island. And the last link, the eastern terminus, was Lake Ronkonkoma. When they had the resort, they had hotels, they had swimmings, and Vanderbilt would take advantage of this, and he built a beautiful inn at the end of the Motor Parkway, right on Lake Ronkonkoma, Petit Trianon Inn. It was a beautiful inn. They had lodging there, and it later on became a restaurant.
You go to Europe, you have the Autobahn, no speed limits.
Right.
So you got on this road after paying your toll. Can you just go, based on the cars, can you go full bore, or was there speed limits?
Initially, yes. As a matter of fact, that's how they advertised it. They said the Motor Parkway, dustless, no speed limits. They found pretty quick that that really wasn't workable. Because again, the road itself had a lot of curves in it, and you really didn't want to go more than 45, 50 miles per hour. It was also relatively narrow. In spots, it was only 16 feet across. So very quickly, they started putting speed limits on at about 45 miles per hour. And they also had their own private police.
They did?
Yes, they did.
I just want to take a couple of steps back, because construction fascinates me. Who was responsible for the actual planning and construction, and where are the kind of roadblocks along the way? When you travel through this country, and you get out west in the Rockies, some of those areas, and you're going up and down, and you're going through tunnels that are carved out of stone and everything else, and a mountainside, it's amazing. What are difficulties they had to overcome in the actual planning and construction?
Yeah, Nassau County is relatively flat, especially in Nassau County. In Suffolk County, they had more of a challenge. It was going up and down hills. They also wanted to flatten out the road, so they almost made mesas. It was almost like a plateau of concrete that they made across. They also really were not that knowledgeable about how to make a road. So the first roads was total concrete. They didn't really allow for what happened when it would rain, and they needed really to have the road expand. So they had a lot of cracking initially on the first part of the Motor Parkway.
Right. Now, we're talking about going from west to east.
Yes.
At one point, they went from the beginning westward into Queens.
Yes.
Why did they do that?
Well, the initial plan was actually to start the Motor Parkway right here in Floral Park.
Right.
The initial plan was 65 miles from Floral Park to Riverhead. And they found out they were going to have problems getting the right-of-way and to acquire the land. So eventually, they started out in the middle of Nassau County, and then they expanded out, both west and east. Eventually, they were able to make the road 45 miles, going all the way from Fresh Meadows, Queens, all the way out to Lake Ronkonkoma.
At one point, there was no longer a motor parkway. I don't know if failure is the proper term, but what ended, quote unquote, Motor Parkway as it was conceived?
Well, Robert Moses, one of the visionaries we talked about, really had a vision to make a road that was free, that was relatively inexpensive, straight, and much larger than the Motor Parkway. And then when he opened up Northern State Parkway, then Southern State Parkway, there really wasn't a need for the Motor Parkway itself. So there was much more traffic on those roads, right. And that's where the Motor Parkway, people were not using it. They weren't getting revenue. And finally, on Easter in 1938, they closed the Motor Parkway. And in lieu of taxes, Vanderbilt and his business associates gave the Motor Parkway to Brooklyn, not Brooklyn, but Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk County.
And what did Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk County do with it?
Now, it's kind of interesting because in Queens, Robert Moses immediately made it a bike path.
Right.
And so the first 2 miles of the Motor Parkway was made into a bike path, and it's still a bike path today that's really enjoyed by people out in Queens. Nassau basically used it, sold off part of the right-of-way for utility lines, for Long Island Lighting, now LIPA. So you always can identify where the Motor Parkway was by looking for the big utility towers. Suffolk County, in the last 14 miles, used it as a road. So the Motor Parkway still exists. Going out to Lake Ronkonkoma, it's known as the Motor Parkway, the Vanderbilt Parkway,
right.
in many cases as well.
Were there ever car rallies on this thing? You're a big car person. You know about this. You ever have groups of people say, let's go, a bunch of cars, and go out and kind of just what they would call touring?
Yes. In fact, last year was the first year they had the first Motor Parkway parade. And we did 15 miles going from Dix Hills all the way out to Lake Ronkonkoma. And that was a lot of fun. And I was able to lead the parade in my car that I owned, the 1909 Alco Black Beast.
All right, you threw it out there. How did you acquire that car? Because that car has actually gone to the Indy 500. I don't know if it's that fast anymore, but it's been on the Indy track.
We've had a lot of fun. This car I acquired in Brussels, Belgium, about 3 years ago. This car won the Vanderbilt Cup Races in 1909 and 1910, and was also in the first Indy 500. And last May, on the 100th anniversary of the Indy 500, I was invited to do a parade lap with the car on race day. And talk about excitement. It was wonderful. And it was an honor to be next to Emerson Fittipaldi, two-time winner in the Indy 500. He drove the car, and I was the passenger. And it was quite a thrill. We did it about 2 hours before the race. About 100,000 people were in the stands. And the car performed great. We were supposed to do a nice, calm parade lap going about 35, 40 miles per hour. But Emerson wanted to see what the car could do.
Oh, yeah?
And we got up to about 68 miles per hour on the straightaway.
Then I'm always fascinated by then and now. You know, then we talked about the road. If somebody's out in their backyard and is kind of fooling around, would they find little pieces of Motor Parkway actually in their backyard?
Yeah, you know, this is a lot of concrete, and really it's tough to get rid of. And there's many people, I'd say there's hundreds of people who have the Motor Parkway in their backyard. And just recently, a gentleman out in Dix Hills invited me to come over with the organization I have, the Long Island Motor Parkway Preservation Society. He invited us to go in the backyard, and he's preserved 275 feet of the Motor Parkway. And he treasures it. He knows he has a historic road in his backyard. And his kids ride in their little toys over there on the Motor Parkway.
So let's talk about that. You talked about the bike path.